So my name is Liam, and I'm one of the speaker event directors for Y Fashion House. I've had the pleasure of talking to Anibal a few times now, and I'm thrilled to introduce Anibal A. Luque to the Yale community and have him share his perspectives on fashion, entrepreneurship, and creation from a legal angle. Before I fully introduce him, I want to just thank a few people. I want to thank Gia Yoon for connecting me with Anibal, Y Fashion House, and my events team, Lauren and Madison, and Anibal Luque. So now let me introduce you all to Anibal. Anibal is a creative and business attorney. He graduated from New York Law School, where he was a member of the Moot Court Association and the Institute of Information Law and Policy. He represents tomorrow's leaders in the creative industries. He's advised and counseled independent record labels, art and fashion startups, music festivals, tech companies, beverage incubators, DJs and producers, stylists, PR firms, management firms, and fine artists, so the whole range. Anibal also focuses on working with innovators of social good, from digital education nonprofits to global impact travel. He's really helping to shape the culture of tomorrow. And as part of his work, Anibal provides strategic business and legal counseling to creatives and entrepreneurs. His experience is primarily in advising on entity formation, protecting and enforcing copyrights and trademarks, drafting and negotiating a wide range of contracts, including recording, publishing, licensing, independent contractor, sponsorship, tour, festival, merchandising, product endorsement, production, and distributional agreements with a focus on international issues. He was most recently a partner in Hoffman Luque LLP. This is where he gained some industry experience at Boyarski Fritz LLP and the Windish agency, as well as providing business and legal counsel to Parka Records. He also currently serves on the board of directors for POWRPLNT, a digital arts collaboratory based in Brooklyn. So in our conversation with Anibal tonight, we'll discuss his career journey, the business side of fashion, and give some legal basics for young creatives and entrepreneurs. We really want this to be a discussion, and it's small and intimate right now, so feel free to interrupt, write in the chat, raise your hand, because we really want to make this as engaging as possible. And without further ado, Anibal Luque. So to begin with, do you want to kind of introduce yourself and talk about your career journey from yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Liam, and thank you all for having me. So I think one of the main reasons why I really enjoy doing these kinds of conversations is because when I was in your position, I didn't have someone that I could look towards to see myself in. And, being brought up in Paterson, New Jersey, in North Jersey, there were not a lot of opportunities for people like me. And so wanting to do something that was outside of my comfort zone, I had to create a lot of that for myself. And so I love the idea of being able to show others that, you really can do whatever you want to do. And it's kind of like all these cheesy cliches that you hear throughout your life. They're cliches for a reason, because in a lot of ways, everything that you can imagine, someone had to start at one point, right? And so there are some paths that you can take, but it's also okay to create your own path. And I think that's what I've been able to do in my career and with my experiences. So whether it was, being the first person in my family to go to college and then to law school and then to break into the entertainment industry and to start my own business and to work with the types of artists and entrepreneurs that I, respect and admire, and that in a lot of ways makes me feel that I'm helping shape culture and helping to actually be, a voice of my generation, has been, one of the most exciting and inspiring things about the work that I get to do. So, that's why I'm here to, to show you that, not all lawyers look a certain way and they don't act a certain way. And, while a lot of the stereotypes may be true, there are a few of us out there that are trying to do things differently. And so, in undergrad, I was a business management major, and I'd always been a kind of an entrepreneur at heart. I was um, 20 minutes west of New York City, so I was coming into New York at a young age and really involved in nightlife and the music scene and DJing, and just seeing how a lot of culture is made late at night and in dark rooms and loud rooms, and in the overlap of different kinds of perspectives and like ways of life. I always admire that about New York, whether it was in the 60s with Warhol or in the 80s with like the Beat Generation, just the idea that there would be all these different thinkers and creators and artists in the room together and coming from different walks of life and talking about things that they knew best was really how a lot of new ideas were formed. And so I always wanted to be a part of that when I was growing up, and that's why I wanted to come to the city. And it was great to actually see that happen, whether it was like in the early 2000s with like the resurgence of like techno and house music and club music, or the mid to late 2000s with like the indie scene popping up. And I was lucky to be at the Windish agency at that point, which was the leading booking agency in the world for like indie artists, and kind of anyone that you can think of now that made their name back then. They were ref by the Windish agency. And I remember there's a year where I went to like 200 shows. It was like insane, just like twice a night or sometimes 3 times a night. I was going to shows after shows after shows. And I got to see a lot of that trajectory of artists going from being unknown and making $100 a night to $100,000 a night in like Madison Square Garden. So that's kind of what always shaped my path of like being at the cutting edge and being able to see that growth and being able to identify artists at such an early point and to help them grow and help be a part of that journey. I've never been one that like resonated with like the mainstream or it's in pop culture. It was always kind of the things that were counterculture and alternative and underground that excited me. And so I did have the experience of getting to work at a boutique entertainment law firm that was very traditional and that had a lot of these like legacy clients and stars that like my parents were into. And that was a great experience because I got to see like what the top of the food chain looks like and what like those really mega multi-million dollar deals look like. But it didn't really resonate with my personality, my ethos. And so just kind of by coincidence or by luck, I met another attorney at this like rave randomly in Williamsburg that was in a similar position to me, was working at a really big law firm, and she was really brilliant. And we kind of talked about like always wanting to open up our own firm. And then like a month later, she gets laid off and I get someone that wants to hire us. And even though we didn't have a law firm at the time, and I had tried to bring it to my bosses at the time, and they weren't really interested in kind of up and coming artists. So we took a chance and started our own firm. And over the course of a year and a half, 2 years, we built something that ultimately she ended up going in-house for one of our clients, and that was more her speed. And then I was able to keep building my practice and getting to work with those types of artists. And over the last 6-7 years, I've been able to see these really young independent artists grow into full-fledged businesses. And that's how I met Gio with Dana from Bond Hardware, which is just another example of someone that has really put in the time, because a lot of times people forget that these overnight sensations or successes really take many, many years. And, it's like, yeah, it is an overnight success. You just don't know which night, right? Because you've been doing it day in, day out. And then it just happens at a certain point. And people think that it just happens so easily and so quickly, but I like to be involved in that journey of getting to that point, right? That bubbling up moment. So, I've made it the focus of our firm to protect those artists and to advise them and to counsel them and to be a resource to them. And, I always wish I could do more, because there is still kind of an inaccessibility to legal counsel. And, a lot of times I meet my client when it's a little too late, right? And I kind of wish that they had the budget or they had the foresight to reach out sooner. And I always say that, like, if I do my job, we can avoid a lot of issues, right? So yes, I can come in and fix things. I clean up a lot of messes, but I think that I do my job most effectively when I can help build the foundation to avoid those eventualities, because it's just hard lessons that get learned too often. And but that's just the reality of the industry and the economy or the economics of the law. So I like to take the opportunity to do these kinds of things so that I can, in a way, get back and share my experiences and share what I've learned throughout my path.
Do you feel like in a sense, you giving legal counsel to some of these smaller artists is like kind of counterculture, going against the kind of establishment of like all these white shoe law firms, because like legal counsel, I want to hear more about like why you think legal counsel is inaccessible, whether it's like a cost thing or whether it's just like a culture thing or just like a lack of knowledge. But I think that like many people benefit from these small young artists who are ignorant about a lot of the legal implications of their work, and then people can take advantage of them. So I think your work is incredibly important and empowering. But yeah, I'm wondering where you think you kind of fit into this ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I've always had that punk just kind of fire in me, and I do think it's subversive in a lot of ways, what I do, because I make it a point that because I am younger than most of my counterparts and adversaries, and because I come from the world that I come from, I go out of my way to make sure that we're providing the best legal service, and we have really high standards for like what that work product looks like. And I've been able to negotiate against some of the top lawyers in the world. And I think that it is I don't know, there's something in the DNA of a lot of these artists that like the DIY ethos is like so anti-establishment. And then part of that is the idea of having a lawyer, needing a lawyer. And a lot of it is lack of access. So, my entire business to date has been word of mouth. We don't do any real marketing or traditional marketing. That's kind of where Gia has come in recently, and as she'll agree, has been like begrudgingly getting me to come out of my comfort zone. But for the most part, most people, they hire their first lawyers just from people like that they know from referrals. And so if you're coming from that DIY world, a lot of people just don't have that network. And so, there also is a big cost obstacle to it, because for the most part, a legal education is expensive. And so most lawyers are coming out with a tremendous amount of debt. And that's kind of why they're funneled into that big law pipeline, because, they need to repay that debt. And so that, old traditional structure of the lawyer is based on the hourly billing model. And so, a lot of lawyers, especially in the entertainment industry, where we're considered to be like one of the most competitive industries in law. There's fewer people that specialize in it. And so there's less access to them, and there's less firms hiring. So it just means that there's just less options to choose from. And a lot of times, you know, you can't even find them online. I mean, I think that's kind of a reason why my website has always been the way it was, because, you know, the law firms that I looked up to didn't even have websites, right? Because like they're so OG that like you know, you either know or you don't know, and they're not marketing to the people that don't know, right? So they had no interest in making themselves accessible. That in a lot of ways was my marketing, that like I wasn't actually doing any marketing, and just that like I was in the community that I served, so the people that knew. You know, but at the same time, that's, you know, I got to the point where like I don't want to be like that anymore, right? I think that it's actually cooler to be more accessible and to give away as much of my knowledge and information as possible, because it does come from this kind of like gatekeeper mentality and ethos. So yeah, I mean, it's the cost, it's the lack of access, the lack of knowledge, and then it is kind of this, you know, a lot of my clients for some reason are just so afraid of success, right? And so they stay in that DIY like anti-establishment culture as a crutch. And so you know, and that punk ethos is saying like, oh, I don't need to do this, I don't need to worry about that. Like, you know, there's a lot of artists that have 20-30 year careers and never form a company, you know. So I think those are a few of the factors that go into why people don't do it, um, and why I think it's so important to have more people like me doing it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think like similar to the field of medicine, where a lot of people have to take on debt and then end up going to higher paying specialties. It seems like there's a similar phenomenon and with law school. And it's great to see though that you're like taking your entrepreneurial spirit and creativity to chart your own path and um, give legal counsel to those who need it. Can you talk more about kind of some of the work you do with POWRPLNT and some of just like the pro bono work you do, and kind of what inspires you to do that?
For sure. So yeah, I think power plant was really kind of, you know, like I had mentioned before with you all about like the benefits of being selfish, or I think there's actually a book, the Virtue of Selfishness, and it's just the idea that when I was a kid, growing up in Patterson, I didn't have access to arts education. I always felt like I had these creative inclinations and didn't have the ability to actually act on them or to explore them, just because the family that I grew up in didn't understand the value of that, or the potential for having an actual professional career in the arts. And so Power Plant is really the vision of something I always wanted as a kid, the ability that you can go somewhere and just learn about different things to express yourself artistically and creatively without the pressure of having to actually create any kind of commercial product, right? So it's just like a place to go explore and learn. And so it's a digital arts nonprofit. We focus on teens in underserved neighborhoods, and we teach them things like Photoshop, Final Cut Pro, Logic, Ableton to like produce beats, you know, how to make your own album cover. It's very kind of skills based, and it's more independent, interest-based learning versus like a full curriculum. So it's these one-off workshops where someone can go and actually come in with an interest and leave with some sort of tool or skill set. And we do like femme only DJ workshops because you know, there's a lot of femme identifying people that have an interest in DJing, but DJ culture is so rooted in, you know, like the cis male mindset that it makes it a little bit intimidating to enter that space. So we're just always trying to create different safe spaces for that creative curiosity. And we also just want to serve the community. So we have just the ability for people to pop in and just use the computer to print out a resume or to look for jobs or to play video games. You know, there's no real expectation for what it is you come in to use PowerPoint for. It's just the idea that you can, you know, kind of like in a lot of ways we say like the library of the future. where people just feel safe going into the space and using our resources and hopefully learning a thing or two. Um, so yeah, that's basically Power Plant, and it's been cool because I started it with my co-founder Angelina Dream, who in a lot of ways is like the godmother of Bushwick and like really created that whole like arts scene and community that people have heard about, and she's like a multidisciplinary artist and just she's a thinker. But over the years, it's been great to like bring more people onto the team and just have them shape Power Plant into what they've seen it. So when we had to close down during the pandemic last year, without us even knowing or like being involved, it like became a mutual aid space and became a space where they were giving out PPE kits and they're doing digital Narcan training classes and all this programming that we as the founders had no involvement in. So that's what's been exciting too, to just watch it grow and become its own thing and it create its own identity. And so that's what we always wanted, just have be a platform for that, that experimentation. So it's been cool to see that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know you said you gave you give the legal basics 101 workshop from that. Do you kind of want to give some of your pointers from that, or some things that in our org we have a lot of people looking to start their own like businesses and fashion stuff and just like in general. So I think like just having some pointers for just some legal basics would really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that's what's exciting about being in the position that you're in right now is you have that, that safety net of being able to just experiment and create and not have to worry about, whether this benefits your career. And I think you forget that a lot of times because you may be thinking about your grades and like what jobs or internships you're going to do. But you really have this opportunity to just experiment. And so a lot of times some of the issues that come with that is that you will probably start to work with your friends or partner up with your friends to work on projects. And when you are kind of in that creative experimental phase, you're not really thinking about the potential for those ideas and those projects to develop into actual businesses. But a lot of these brands do start as these passion projects in school, and like I mentioned before, it takes a long time to actually develop a brand into a business. So it can be a little hard to think about your ideas in that way, that like they have real monetary value and real like long-term potential. And so some of the downsides of that is that you kind of enter into these arrangements with friends, roommates, partners that you have, and you don't really write down what your expectations are. And so you get into situations where circumstances change, memories fade, the relationship changes, and you have this business through a value, and you haven't really figured out a way to deal with it and how to handle when those expectations aren't met, or when people's circumstances change and they maybe can't be as involved as they were when it first started, but still kind of have expectations of being at the same level of ownership than might feel right or fair to you. So one of the biggest tips I can say is to put everything down in writing. And, it doesn't mean you need a contract. It doesn't mean you need to hire a lawyer. But when you are working with your friends and when you are collaborating on projects, really be clear about what your expectations are from yourself and from your partners. So really understanding, what are the duties and responsibilities that everyone's going to contribute to the project. What's the ownership looking like for any of the intellectual property that you do create, right? If you do create original works of authorship, if you create original ideas that are, expressed in some sort of tangible form, what does that ownership look like? How are decisions going to be made? A lot of times when you go into business or into a project with someone, it's just two people, right? So what happens when there's a tiebreaker that's needed? um, what does that voting look like? What does everyone have an equal say for everything, right? Maybe some people have more of a business mind or a financial background, and so maybe they should be in charge of those decisions, but the other person is more of the creative director and should be really involved and have the final say with the aesthetics, and kind of really separating your strengths and weaknesses, and building your understanding and your expectations off of that, I think is really important and doesn't happen. Another thing to keep in mind is, again, it's like you can do a lot of these things by yourself and without the need of a lawyer, just if you know where to look, right? So whether when you are creating these concepts and developing them into products or services, there's different ways to protect yourself, right? And so the most common thing to do is to form a business. A lot of people talk about like LLCs or corporations, and there's a lot of different factors that go into which one makes sense. But really, what you want to do is you have to weigh out like what are the pros and cons of doing that, and at what point do you do it. So LLCs and corporations are both state specific, so depending on the state that you're in, whether you live in or where your business operates out of, that's going to dictate what the laws of that state are, and how to set up your company. So a lot of people will run a business without setting it up, and that's okay too, as long as you understand that like the risks are, or the main benefits of doing that is that these companies give you what's called limited liability. So whatever activities the business has, the liabilities that come from those activities are limited to the assets of the company. So if you're creating a shoe or a fashion brand, and you accidentally infringe on someone else's copyright, right? And so they want to come to you for some reason. They can only go after whatever you've got in your business bank account, if you've got one, right? If you don't have a company set up, they're going to go after your personal bank account. And maybe you're like, well, I'm in college, I don't have any money in my personal bank account, so they can do that, right? But maybe your parents have an account for you set up, and maybe your parents have assets that you're involved in for some reason. And so you have to look at your personal situation and really think like, okay, what's the risk that I'm at, and what do I have to lose? And if you don't have to worry about those kinds of things, then it's not that big of an issue. But you get this limitation of liability so that you're only liable for whatever assets the business has. And that's important too when you're working with other people, right? You don't want to be responsible for something that someone else does. So those are kind of the things to think about. But again, whether it's forming a copyright or a trademark, basically copyright is the idea that the moment you create something, put it in tangible form, you have this bundle of rights where you as the original author are the only one that can do certain things with that copyright. So you are the only one that can distribute it, you can display it, you can reproduce it, you can create derivative works out of it. So you have this bundle of rights and you decide how it gets to be used. And then with trademarks, it's like your calling card. So it's like your trademark is the identifying source on those goods and services, so that if someone sees your brand out in the real world, they can associate those goods or services with you as a creator. And so that's important when you do see kind of these like potential copycats. If you created a brand that's got really strong standards of quality and a really strong aesthetic, you want it to be clear that people don't get confused as to who created what. So the standard is like the reasonable person standard. that if two people, or if one person saw these two products side by side, would they be able to correctly identify who made what? It's like Coke and Pepsi. So those rights you get the minute that you start, for copyrights, the minute that you put an idea onto paper. So whether it's a sketch that you make for design or lyrics to a song, as soon as you put it on paper or on your computer, some sort of tangible form, you get those rights. You don't need to go and hire a lawyer to, to get those rights. Yes, there's some benefits to doing so, but, just keep in mind that you inherently get those rights as soon as you put it in writing. And with trademarks, same thing. It's like the minute you start selling a good or service or marketing it with that trademark, you get these inherent, what's called common law state rights in them. So, so just understand that, put everything in writing. Even if you're not doing things formally, try and do so on your own as much as possible, and understand that you've got rights. You've got more rights than you think you do. So I feel like those are kind of the basics, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I threw a lot at you there, but that's just kind of the few basic tips that I would start off with.
Yeah, thank you so much for just like making that so accessible and not intimidating. How, I know it varies on a state-to-state basis, but how easy is it to just like create, and what are the costs of just creating your own LLC or like a corporation or partnership?
That's a good point, because it should be so easy, right? It's actually supposed to be easy. Like every state, for the most part, will have their own version of how to form your own company on their state website. Usually it's what's called the Secretary of State. So, you just go to like your state and form an LLC on Google, and you should get the state website. And, it's really just a matter of filling out basic questions about the name of your company, your information, like your name, address. It'll ask in some way or another, like, what does your business do? But you can be really vague and just, you can say like fashion design, or, if what we do as lawyers is, we'll say whatever it is, if it is fashion design or any legal activity for businesses under the state. So, because you might start a business doing one thing and then you expand in a year or you pivot. So you actually don't really need to be that specific when you're forming the company. And, the costs vary. But for example, in New York, it's, I think, like $170 to file an LLC. In California, I think it's like $80. But, there's, again, this is why it should be easy, but it's not necessarily. New York has this weird thing called publication requirement, where anytime you form an LLC, you've got to publish in 2 newspapers that you exist as an LLC, and you don't get to choose which newspapers it is. And it's based on the county that you're in. So you can kind of get stuck with like, if you live in Manhattan, like I do, you might get stuck with like the Wall Street Journal. And you've got like a $1,500 bill to place ads in a newspaper that, how many people are reading physical newspapers and reading the ad section, right? But that's something you have to do. In California, you've got what's called the franchise tax. So even if your company makes $0 a year, you've got to pay a minimum in taxes of, I think, like $800. So every state has its own little quirks. And so that's why I say, like, it should be easy, but it's not always. A lot of times I joke that half my clients get referred to me from LegalZoom, because, a lot of people use that, and, LegalZoom can be great in a lot of ways because it is affordable, but it's not tailored to your needs. And so a lot of times that one size fits all doesn't always make sense. And I come in and have to fix a situation, after the fact. But, you really can, at least in the beginning, try it and do one of those things, because the information is really minimal that's needed to actually set up the company. And then it lets you, once you have a company set up, you can go get a business bank account. And so that's one of the important things, that like you really want to start separating your personal expenses from your business expenses, because if you do start to make money, you can write off a lot of things against your profits. And so that lowers your tax bill. And so that's really important, especially when you're starting off. And let's say you're renting out studio space. Let's say you're taking Ubers to meetings with potential buyers or potential collaborators, or buying art supplies or equipment. All that stuff you get to write off, and you can still write it off if you don't have a company, but there's certain limits. And so when you do have a company formed, you have more ability to write things off, and you have more access to those deductions. So again, it's state specific. A lot of people do what's called, or a lot of people will set up their companies in Delaware. I don't know if you've heard like those rumors, or it's just kind of a thing that's happened. It's mainly because Delaware has become, they made it a kind of a focus of their state to attract business. And so they made their laws in a way that is attractive and business friendly. So taxes are a lot less in Delaware, and investors for companies are used to working in Delaware courts and with Delaware law. So if you're thinking of getting potential investors, they're going to want you to be a Delaware corporation. Just doesn't. And the good thing too is that like it is relatively easy to set up a company. So even if you set it up in the wrong state, you can always close it and start a new one. And a lot of times that's what you have to do, because the investor's like, well, I don't care, I want you to be in Delaware. So that's become more and more common. A lot of people also file in Nevada, because Nevada, same thing, has really low taxes, and they've also made it a point to like really prioritize privacy. So with a lot of these other states, when you're filing the LLC, you've got to put your personal information, or you've got to hire a company that's called a registered agent, and they will act as like your official mailing address for government records. And so if you don't want your personal details, your personal home address on public records, you would either set up a registered agent, or you go to Nevada, where they have more privacy laws to protect the identity of the owners. But yeah, you don't technically have to be in the state where you form your LLC. It's just that some states are more aggressive about going after people like that. So like New York says, like, I don't care where you are. If you do any business in New York, you've got to pay New York taxes, and California can be the same way. Yeah, if you want to consider those other states, there's that option with a registered agent, and it lets you do that. And again, LegalZoom will do all that for you, but you can do it yourself just as well.
Yeah, that's just really the interesting, like the hodgepodge of like requirements and in all these like laws across state lines. But I'm just so impressed how accessible and like non-intimidating you've made all this stuff. And I think it's like incredibly empowering that you're providing that to so many young creatives. One thing we did talk about in our meeting, you said that you were going to give a case example about Hood by Air, and I was really excited to hear about your work that you've done with Shane Oliver, and because they're relaunching after their 4-year-long hiatus as Anonymous Club. Is that what they're called? Can you say yes?
Well, so yes and no. And yeah, I can definitely talk more about that, because I think, my work with Shane and just Shane's trajectory is a really great learning lesson for sure, for, what happens when you're a young creative and you come across tremendous success and might not necessarily have the team or the foundation in place to embrace that. And so, with Shane, even though I've known him for years, we only started working together uh, in this kind of the relaunch. And so um, Shane started Hood by Air and HBA as two separate brands. And I think that because Shane was so ahead of his time with, luxury streetwear and like urban culture, that it was really hard to get the messaging across through the mainstream media of, the complexities of his vision. And so a lot of times people kind of conflated those two different concepts, where like Hood by Air for him was this high-end luxury, runway, couture brand, and HBA was the more accessible, still luxury but streetwear, identity. And you would kind of hear people use the two interchangeably, but for him it was really different. And I think that's kind of one of the big issues of going on that hiatus and restarting with this new anonymous brand concept. So the distinction now is that Hood by Air is a reboot for sure of everything that was being done before, and in a lot of ways an elevation of that, but still very much tied to the kind of the system of what institutional fashion is, and the concepts of e-commerce and retail and all these things that have already existed in that world. And anonymous is more of the place where it can be like what Hood by Air was when it started, and it's like this creative hub that will act as like the inspiration for the designs of Hood by Air. So it's not that like Hood by Air doesn't have its own identity, or it's more that because it has its own identity, it's constrained to that, where anonymous is a place where he can explore and experiment with new ideas and new concepts, and then like can borrow those ideas into Hood by Air, but is really trying to, again, establish those lines between the different brands and how they operate aesthetically. So Hood
Is
by
it
Air,
like similar to like, I don't know, like Andy Warhol's like Factory, or Lady Gaga's like House of Gaga, kind of having this separate interlocking umbrella, like house of creativity, in a
yeah,
sense?
yeah, I think the factory is the best way of putting it. Exactly. So it's Andy Warhol did the same thing, where like at a certain point, because of his commercial success, he was constrained to like, okay, well, I need to keep bringing out the hits, right? But now I can use this other place and bring in all these young creatives and really experiment, do my video stuff, whatever it is, and that won't affect, it won't affect the bag, right? Like I'll still make my money, still do my thing there, but now I can go try these new things under this new brand. So I think, yeah, that's the best way of putting it for sure.
And to like continue to grow, one of the things we wanted to talk about was like considering outside investments and investors. I don't know if you can like disclose this, but was can you talk about like investment in a situation like this, or
Yeah,
when you're trying to grow creatively?
absolutely. Yeah, no, that's another great point too. And there's actually a really good article in the Business of Fashion that talks about this, which is why I can talk more about it. Um, but one of the biggest things too is like when you're starting a brand and growing, you're gonna get to the point where you realize that like, oh wow, there's actual buzz and there's actual potential here, but you don't have that money to scale. And so you start thinking about the idea of bringing in investors. And it is really important for a business to be able to grow faster than that, like like Dana's 11-year journey to get Bond to where it is now. Investment is like that, putting gasoline on that fire. But bringing on investors is really no different than bringing on partners and collaborators, and I think a lot of people forget that. So one of the best things that Shane was able to do in this relaunch is the main investor that was involved in the beginning in a smaller capacity, but Shane was able to bring someone that understands his vision, that understands his audience, that, the investor Edison Chen, worked with V-Loan and worked with Offway, and like really understands that space of like, okay, how do you maintain that artistic integrity, but still have commercial viability? And so, whereas in the beginning, Shane worked with more of those traditional investors like out of Italy and like large corporations that just were like, oh, this is a cool new designer, we should throw all this money at him and he'll figure it out. And a lot of times it's not the best thing to do, right? Just like you sometimes want those checks and balances. Sometimes you need the adult in the room telling you no. And so a lot of times you saw that happen with Hood by Air, where not the best business decisions were made because there was just no one there guiding them, and there was like too much free reign. Now Shane's a lot older and has learned a lot of those mistakes from the first time around, and with Edison involved, has an investor that understands how much money it takes to go to market, understands what that market is, what the market wants. And so besides just giving capital to Shane, is also a creative partner in a lot of ways. So they kind of brainstorm the marketing strategies, they brainstorm the sales strategies. So even though it can feel a lot of times like you're desperate for money and like really whoever's willing to be involved is the right fit, you really do want to treat it as more of that, that partnership, and think of it like dating, and really understand, like, does this investor know my business? Does this investor know my market, understand my potential? Because like in reality, like it's a lot easier to find money than you think it is. So you really have to go for that smart money, that the right money. And also the investment community is really small. So you can like learn about people's reputations by just asking around, and and ask them, like, what other companies have you invested in? Right? Like, because you'll see that a lot of these investors do like to specialize, because they need to understand what they're investing in. So if you have someone offering you like money and they're like, oh, well, yeah, I invest in pharmaceuticals and I invest in this other random thing, it's like, maybe it's not the right fit, right? Find out, like, all right, well, who are my competitors, or who are the people that like I aspire to be, and who invested in them? And you're going to start seeing that you'll see the same names pop up over and over again, because all these communities are really small. And so that's kind of what you should be thinking about and looking for, and like, uh, not being afraid to say no. I think that's another thing too. It's like, you'll realize that you'll get so much more opportunities and so much further in your career by the no's you say than the yeses. It, it feels daunting because sometimes you don't know when the next one's going to come along, but you do have that luxury of being true to yourself and true to your brand and true to your core values as an artist and as a designer and as an entrepreneur. And especially when you don't have a partner and kids and a house and mortgages to think about, take more risks. Be afraid to fail, because that's what you'll see happen over and over again with all these success stories. It's just like all the untold failures, right? But that's how you learn. You're gonna make mistakes, and that's okay. So I think that's definitely a lot of things that Shane learned this time around, of like being really careful who you bring around too, and like who you bring into your circle, and understanding like what your limits are and what your weaknesses are, and finding people that can complement them. Right. So like you don't always need to find other like-minded people. Sometimes it's healthy to have um, those awkward relationships where it's someone that has a completely different perspective than you do, but they'll challenge you, they'll keep you in check, they'll get you out of your comfort zone. So thinking about it from that angle as well.
Yeah, I think those are all really great insights that can be applied to really um, any space we go into, just kind of like regardless of prestige or all these different things. Like fit is really important. if you really want to carry your own vision forward, being surrounded by investors, lawyers, other creatives that share the same vision as you. So yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Just hearing the business side of these small fashion brands, because as you were saying before, like you think someone blows up overnight and it's which night. There's so much work behind the scenes, even in these like indie small underground brands, and there's a lot of money there as well, a lot of yeah.
That's the thing. It's like, it is important to really stay true to yourself, because I joke about that too. My job a lot of times is to be the one to say no, and that's okay. And you need to understand that that's 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to say, no, you can't do that. And sometimes you need to push back, you need to be like, all right, well, what can I do? Right? Fine. Maybe I can't, but what are the limits? So that's okay. And Shane has that too with his team, so with Shane, what's really cool is that even though I'm his personal lawyer and helped him with the whole Hood Buyer stuff and setting up Anonymous, I also acted as CEO of Anonymous to get it started.
Whoa.
And so I was more involved in just building out that foundation, building out the team, helping, create the marketing plan, the business plan, the organizational structure, because like I mentioned, I have that business background and I've always been an entrepreneur myself. So it made a lot of sense. But that's what we built the team out for. We had someone that just handled production, that handled all the tech stuff, that handled the finances. And so you really want people that have a specific role, and that's okay, right? You don't want a bunch of yes people in the room, because you'll get to a point where you lose sight of yourself, right? And so really trying to, again, get out of your comfort zone and challenge yourself and have people that bring different things to the table, and being okay with the awkwardness and being okay with, listening to other people, but still standing your ground, so same thing with me being an entrepreneur and having a team where, I'm always like, well, what do you think? Right. And they tell me what they think. I'm like, all right, well, I'm still going to do it my way. But at least now I know the different angles and different perspectives, because they're like, well, why'd you ask? I'm like, well, because I need to see all the different sides, and then that way I still know that I feel good about my way of doing it. So it's not just that you have to listen to everyone else, but take that information in, take that input, and then you're going to know what's best for your brand, because it's your brand.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, it often feels like you have to spread yourself so thin and just be a generalist, but it's just, you're right, so important to like have a specialty or have a niche that you can bring to the table, and then be open to hear what other people are good at and where other people are honing their focus into.
That's the balance that you have to try and strike, where I work with a lot of clients that don't do one thing, right? They might start off as fine artists or digital artists or performance artists, and then want to make music, and then want to create the merch for their album, and so they become fashion designers, and then they have an app idea for how they're going to market it or execute it. And so there's a lot of stigma against that generalization, or the being generous or a jack or jill of all trades. But I think the important thing there is that like you can do all the things you want to do. We do live in that world where you have these, someone called them today slashers, right? Like musician slash creative director slash designer slash whatever. But you want to start off by having one thing be your thing, so it's like, just know you're young, you'll get there, you'll get to the point where you can do all those things, and that's okay. But you want to start off by building your brand with one thing and hyper focus on that one thing so you're the best at that one thing, and then you'll have the confidence and the reputation and the the freedom to branch off into other things. So just having that patience and that understanding.
Absolutely. I feel like I've been like talking a lot, so I want to open it up to some other questions from other members of YFH, especially because a few of our members said that they're interested in going into law. So I think that a few people have some questions. Does anyone want to mute themselves or have
Yeah.
anything to ask? Great,
Yeah,
Tamara. Go ahead.
I think especially going off of like this conversation about like finding that niche and like building your brand off of that. Um, I'm more curious about like from the law side. I know personally I want to go to law school and work in fashion law, as I was telling you earlier. But I'm kind of debating on what would be the best way to go about it. So I know that I want to take at least like a gap year and work a few years before going to law school. I feel like that would be a great way to figure out, especially like what kind of law I'm most interested in. But I know your own trajectory is very unique. But I was wondering if you had like any advice of like if I were to see myself in a future in fashion law, um, what kind of things should I be looking out for when I'm looking for like work experience, extracurriculars, and like things that like could help me kind of segue into that area of law in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I think it'll be the same advice no matter what. Um, get as much varied experience as possible, right? So it's like if you know you want to do fashion law, then try and get a job in every other aspect of fashion. You know, like work for a designer, work for a fashion PR agency, work for a retail store, work for a factory. Like understand every aspect of the fashion industry because that's how you'll see where the law intersects. You know, the law intersects with everything. Like everything you do, there's a law that governs it or there's a lawyer that created it, right? So you don't need to like immediately start working in fashion law because you know even now, I think like when I was in law school, you didn't have a specialization. You can't major in fashion law, right? Like they don't let you do that. So the advice that's always given to me and that still applies is when you're already in law school, no matter what kind of law you think you might want to do, all you need to worry about is just being the best lawyer you can be. You know, because in law school, they don't teach you, first of all, anything you learn in law school will probably not apply by the time you get out of law school, right? Because law schools teach you how to be a lawyer. They don't teach you the laws. They teach you how to think like a lawyer. They teach you how to like know where to find the answers to the questions you have. So when you're in law school, that's really all you should be thinking about. Like, how can I like hone my legal writing, my legal arguments, my legal speaking, the legal thinking. That's all you want to focus on. But before law school, if you already kind of know, then you know that's what helped me the most. Is that before law school, I had managed DJs. I had my own record label. I was a promoter for clubs and events. You know, then I interned at a booking agency. I saw how booking worked. I was a journalist, so I was writing articles and you know blogs and going to shows and interviewing artists. So by the time I actually became you know a lawyer, I knew how the business deals worked for all of these things, and that ends up being kind of your secret sauce as a lawyer is that you just understand all the nuances of a deal, right? You know, because at the end of the day you start seeing the same contracts over and over again, so it's not so much like oh being able to read legalese. It's about knowing okay, well, the standard like modeling deal is like 15%, but like a lot of agencies in Italy like to do a double dip. So they'll charge you 15% here and they'll charge you 15% there. And like understanding that like you need now a lot of people know you need a license to be a booking agency. And so some people will structure the companies as management agencies. And so then you're like, well, are you actually treating me as a manager? Or are you treating me as a booking agent? So like those are things that you can't learn anywhere. It's only through experience. So that plus like it's so much easier to talk to a lawyer when you're not going after their job, right? So like if you're like, oh, I do this, or I'm working here, there's going to be a lawyer in a legal department there, and you can always reach out to them, because really getting into these industries is all about who you know. So you want to get that angle right, and like I said before, when I was in school, I was just reaching out to everyone, right? I would, for music, I would go, I still collect records, but I'm a DJ, so I would look up my favorite artists and flip over the back, and most album artwork says who their lawyer is. And so I'd like reach out to them, I'd find out like who's the label. Oh, okay. And you can really Google anything at this point, and there's LinkedIn. Although I mean, I don't check my LinkedIn, but like apparently people do, and so try it. But
It's very much a thing here. Too much of a thing.
yeah, but I mean, some people do check it. So you just got to try, and you got to like not be afraid to get rejected. Like my first job at Boyarski, Fritz, I had actually applied there like a couple years prior and just never heard back, because like one of the partners went to my law school. And the reason I got the interview is because I was working for this like nightlife promoter, starting his blog that he wanted to start. And so I'm just like writing these like blog entries, and he was like, oh, by the way, like, what are you doing? Like, what? I'm like, oh, I want to be an entertainment lawyer. And he's like, you should talk to my entertainment lawyer. And he like called his lawyer on the spot, and it was like the same firm that I had been sending my resume to for years that just never got back to me. But through this like convoluted way, I got my way in. And so you got to think of it like that. Like if you know the goal, you don't know how you're going to get there, but you just got to figure it out and like try everything possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's great advice, because like I hadn't really thought about how it doesn't necessarily have to be in like for fashion law. Like it doesn't, like the experience doesn't have to be in fashion law specifically. Like it can start from different areas and then branch off from there. So yeah, thank you so much.
For sure. Yeah, and that's the other thing too. It's like, because all these things too mean so many different things, right? So like fashion law could be setting up companies for fashion designers. It can be protecting their IP with copyrights and trademarks. It could be doing like international law, where you're dealing with customs and bringing things into the country, or like counterfeit issues. It could be immigration, where a lot of designers that are from overseas are trying to hire people there, or trying to get hired in the US. So it's like you really have so many issues that like you can't prepare for that. So just learn as much about the industry as a whole as possible, and then be the best lawyer you can be, and then everything else will fall into place. What else you got me?
Yeah, I can ask a question. I found that advice to be really insightful, and especially just reaching out and taking that initiative to see what you like and doing the best that you possibly can. And I think sometimes, especially if you're constantly trying to reach out or trying to do different things to figure that out, it can kind of get overwhelming. And so I think I'm just wondering what practices you do daily, or what you do to be in the right headspace for the work that you do, and to put that best in to make it the best that you can.
That's a great point. That's a great question. And I can't say that I'm the best at staying on top of it, but one of the reasons I was in Asia before pandemic, I really got into my spiritual practice. And I grew up Roman Catholic and went to Catholic school my whole life, but it didn't really resonate with me and my identity. And through learning and being obsessed with culture, and the Beat Generation and Kerouac and Ginsberg, and learning how they had this kind of deep-rooted interest and practice in Buddhism, I got really into that. And so I ended up joining a monastery in Thailand and entering the monkhood. And so that idea of mindfulness and meditation practice is really one of the most important things I've been able to learn over the last few years, and what's really been able to help me manage the stress of not just being a lawyer, but an entrepreneur and running multiple projects at once. So, you know, I put that into my calendar. I do what's called time blocking. So every day, you know, I always joke, I don't really get to fully create my schedules. A lot of it's done for me by my team. But I do set aside time for myself. And so that's like the time blocked off where it's meditation in the morning and in the afternoon, like right before we connected tonight. And then I have like a morning routine and really making sure that like I set aside time for myself where, you know, I'm not checking my phone, I'm not checking email, you know, just really having those boundaries, I think is really important. You know, so like my friends know that like I don't answer unscheduled calls, you know, if you need something, like you got to let me know in advance and we can schedule a time. You know, they always say like, oh, when are you free? It's like, well, you know, I'm not free, I'll make time for you, so let me know when you want me to make time for you. But you really, you get to a point where it's a lot. You have your classes, you're running these organizations, you're applying for schools, you're doing all these things. So the more that you can have some sort of structure to your day, and still allowing for that spontaneity, you know, is definitely important. You know, I think um, that's important too. I like set aside time for me to be creative. You know, I set aside time for me to DJ or for me to work on music. You know, even though it sounds like structured, it's important to create that, you know, that space and time for yourself. Um, there's a really good book called The Artist's Way that kind of talks about that and like going on dates with yourself to the museum once a week and doing things like that for yourself, I think is really important.
Thank you so much. That sounds like a really interesting book, and I really appreciate finding that sense and time to be mindful and to take time for yourself. I think that those are really important practices, and I'm really glad to kind of hear the way that you do that.
Thanks, Madison.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're gonna wrap up tonight. But thank you so much for just sharing yourself with us tonight. We're so blessed. I feel like it often feels like with all these different paths that people take here at Yale, there's all these funnels and pipelines you need to be in and everything needs to be super linear. So we really appreciate like sharing your just like creative spirit and entrepreneurial spirit, and showing like you can find meaning and great work by just like following your own gut and surrounding yourself with people and things that excite you. So that's really invaluable. So yeah, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, do you want to say anything last?
Yeah, well, I mean,
Insights?
for sure. I think, you know, like I mentioned, I really do want to be more of a resource. So feel free to reach out and use me. I know you both of you mentioned considering law. I'm happy to answer more questions offline. We are doing more stuff now to be more accessible. So we've got a newsletter, so feel free to sign up for that.
Newsletters are coming back.
I know. And we always joke, you'll see on the end, it says like, unlike most techno DJs, we do take requests. So if there's anything you want to know, you know, any questions you have, anything that you see that's like interesting and you're like, how does that work? You know, let us know and we can actually like tailor the newsletters to your interests. So definitely feel free to do that. We're on the social media game now. I'm not the best at it. I've got to like figure out how to get it on, like it's on my work phone now, which I like. But you know, the DMs will be open if you want. You can reach out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to use me as a resource for whatever you need. I'm happy to do so.
What's your contact information?
Yeah, for sure. My email is pretty simple. It's a@Luque LUQUE.us. And then I think, what's our Instagram? It's my last name, Luque_PLLC.
Yeah, and I'll just drop your website in here for everyone.
And we're updating the website in a few weeks. Oh, we have a link tree now, which is cool. I didn't know that we had that.
all coming together.
Yeah, no, they're so quick. It's funny. I love my team. Having an important team, that's another thing. You know, like
Yeah.
really not settling. Like, yes, it's great to work with your friends, but only if your friends can deliver. Yeah, you need to have those standards. So I have an amazing team. That's been super helpful.
Yeah, shout out Jamie. She also made this all happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, follow them on social media. I just dropped his website, his practice in the chat. So all of that is there. But yeah, thank you so much. It was so great having this like intimate conversation, especially because a few of our members are really interested in the work you're doing. So yeah, thank you. We'll be in contact.
Yeah, do it again.
And
It's fun.
yeah, I hope you have a nice weekend as well, and hope everyone as well enjoyed this and has a nice weekend.
You too. Get outside.
Bye.
Matt's
Thank you so much.
Bye.
a pleasure. Take care.